Anybody got time for doing nothing but listening to the Powell Movement?
Welcome to the Powell Movement. I'm your host, Mike Powell, and this week it's finally back to snowboarding. The show has been dominated by skiing lately, and there's nothing wrong with that, but it's time to switch it up a little. This week's guest has created so much in the snowboard world over his 25 plus years in it, it's crazy. Mikey LeBlanc started as a punk kid from Maine who skateboarded, played hockey and lacrosse, and found snowboarding in middle school. Fast forward to today, and he's looked at as a pioneer in the world of snowboarding, known for huge ollies, giant rails with big consequences, and being able to ride everything. Throughout the years, Mikey has shown an ability to get his shit done his way, and that can be seen with his often copied brand, Holden outerwear. Before we talk the life and times of Mikey LeBlanc, I want to ask you to follow me on Instagram at The Powell Movement. Please share my posts on social media, and if you want to reach out to me for any reason, my email is mike@thepowellmovement.com. Finally, I need to thank my sponsors. They are evo.com, Rescue Water, the 10 Barrel Brewery, and Unofficial Networks. Please support them and save some money by using the codes in the ads. And now, let's talk to Mikey LeBlanc. You just get into the office?
Yeah.
California?
Yep, it's good. I'm actually up north of San Francisco, so.
Is it really expensive to live there, too?
Not where I'm at, but you could definitely, if you were anywhere closer to San Francisco, it'd be very expensive.
Yeah, I mean, I'm up in Seattle and it's crazy, but San Francisco seems like it's absolutely insane.
I think where I'm at is probably less than Seattle, depending on where you live in Seattle.
First, is it Mike or Mikey? When you're talking with friends, what do people refer to you as?
I call myself Mike. Some people call me Mike who are not from action sports, but people in general from action sports know me as Mikey. So it's probably best that way for this kind of situation.
I'm a Mike as well. And I remember being a kid, I'm sure you remember as well, there was Mikey Likes It. Mikey's a name that you have till you're like 15. Is it weird being 52 and being called Mikey?
Well, I've turned 45 next week. I guess I've called myself Mike since I was in my late 30s just because there's a certain thing about other people can call you what you want, but what you call yourself kind of sets a tone.
Cool. I went to your website, I went to Holden, and things must be absolutely amazing right now. You should be moving to San Francisco because every product but accessories is sold out, it looks like.
Yeah, it's pretty standard in the industry to obviously buy tight these days. You know, the days of irresponsibly over-ordering are over. And yes, we were down to a very small amount left in December, which felt great. And then in early January, we basically got it out of there. So it was good.
Do you feel like you're leaving business on the table, or is it's a good thing and next year you'll order a little bit more to handle any growth?
I mean, there's no secret that the internet is growing, so we sell direct as well as to retail. I think there's different types of customers out there. And so, yeah, we're not going to go crazy, but there's definitely opportunity to grow online. We usually gauge it by where retail has gone in a year, which it changes radically year to year. I mean, as you know, people are mostly leaving. There's not a lot of new retail coming. So you got to fill the appetite of the customer regardless of whether the retail's there or not online. So
the retailers, how do they feel about you selling direct? And when you decided to pull that trigger and go that way, what did they say?
You know, we did it early on in like 2008, maybe.
So way ahead of everybody else almost.
Well, you know, there were some people doing it, and we've always been a niche brand. We're still tiny. Like, I think there's a misconception that Holden's maybe a little bigger than we are. And for the first 2 or 3 years, there was probably the same 3 to 5 retailers that would say something. I would say one of them is still in business, and they're great, and they were our very first shop, and they're friends, and they would just kind of give a shit. But, you know, my simple response was, hey, the day you order everything in the collection and represent it, we'll pull it right off. but no one does. I mean, we design a small, tight collection. It wouldn't be that hard to stock every single Holden style, but there isn't one retailer in the world that does that.
No, they look at it like, hey, you're going to show me 3 jackets. I'm going to pick 1 or 2 guaranteed. I'm definitely not going to buy all 3.
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, that's part of the deal. And the other part is like, we had the privilege of having some larger brands come in and school us a couple of years ago. And just, it's healthy to get outside perspective. Some of the brands, I mean, we're talking the biggest of the big, their goals are pretty much the largest sportswear company in the world's goal is 50% direct a year from now.
Wow.
And the other one that came in is a newcomer to skate, snow, surf, and their goal is 80% direct in the next couple of years. So, I mean, if you're not doing it as a brand right now, you are blowing it.
The brands now are in the position that retailers were in 2000, where if they didn't start investing in the internet, we're seeing them disappear completely. And if the brands don't invest in their own retail or driving sell-through themselves, yeah, in 5-10 years, they might not be around either.
Yeah, it's funny with retail because there's these behemoth online players that we deal with that are great partners. On one level, they're great because they give us some of our biggest product orders, but on another level, they expose us to a customer that probably doesn't know anything about us, potentially. A small brand like Holden tends to get hidden on the large sites just because there's bigger brands paying for logo space and products to be there in the forefront. And it's in the best interest of the retailer as well because they've bought literally 1,000 times more of that brand than they have Holden, maybe more. And then with the small retailers, I think some of them started to go the route of online, and I think they may still have a very small presence for someone that's maybe learned about it. But there's no way those small retailers can compete with these big retail online players. I mean, the way online works to me when I go buy a product, I find what I like first. I Google it. I find the price and who can get it to me the quickest. And the Google results, the way they work, they show up by who pays the most for that position. And there's no way a small shop can compete with a large online player. So I think the small retail's focus has shifted back to culture and building community, which is great for our brand. We're a niche brand. So we love those kind of retailers because you can't find Holden everywhere. And if it's in their store, it's special. They need to be special, and they need to create the community to create the customer coming in and feeling like it's their extended community or family or whatever. So I think the smaller retails have actually, the better ones have shifted back more to community and their own culture and vibe rather than trying to compete online. And I think that will continue for a while because there is still people that want to come in, especially with clothing and hard goods, but clothing, especially like putting it on and touching and feeling there's something to be said for that when you're dropping in on a technical piece,
And there's nothing worse than you get your jacket in the mail and it's the wrong size and you're just like, fuck, am I going to wear this even though it's a little bit smaller? Or am I going to wait 2 weeks to get the right size?
For sure. Or you might buy something and it might fit you, and then you go to the mountain with your buddy and you're like, damn it, like my jacket sucks. It's wet. His isn't. And you're like, fuck, I mean, when are you going to learn that lesson that you're not 16 anymore and looking for the cheapest item and then it fails in a year? Like, there's a lot of things to learn and as a customer and, having the right store, if you go in and get that real live customer service and feedback, there's a lot to be gained from that too. So
the retail experience has changed a ton, but instead of talking about retail right now, I'm going to jump into your early life. And I think you were born and raised in Maine.
Yep. I was raised in Topsom, Maine, which is no one's ever heard of that. And it's a small town. I'm about 15 minutes from Freeport, which is where LL Bean is from, and about 30 minutes from the big city, which is Portland.
I just like saying Bar Harbor, but
yeah,
that's all I know about Maine.
That's way up north. I mean, Bar Harbor's rad. It's funny it's known because it's probably the most bougie part of Maine because that's where all the people with lots of money bought homes, and it's a gorgeous place, and the surrounding area up there is like amazing. It's so beautiful, and just ton of culture and amazing fisherman, redneck, hippie mix of people, which is, I love that mixture.
It sounds like an island off of Seattle.
Yeah, I would say it's similar for sure. You guys have a little more of the native element, which I think is really a cool addition too.
In terms of life, did you have brothers or sisters growing up?
Yeah, I have two brothers, one older, one younger, and we were all into snowboarding. We started skiing and skateboarding first. You know, we all played hockey. If you didn't play hockey in Maine, you're pretty much an outsider. But skateboarding and snowboarding was all part of our deal, and sports, and it was, yeah, real cool brothers.
Rich or poor growing up? How'd your family do?
We were middle class. We were not by any means rich.
But able to play hockey, which is an expensive sport, I would think.
Yeah, it can be. My older brother got all the new shit. My parents would say to you, "What do you want, anything new?" And I was like, "Nah, I'll just use this old stuff." I always appreciated vintage and old, and I'm stoked that I grew up that way. Like, you know, we would go once a year to get our Levi's for school, and I would always be like, well, I don't really want new jeans. I want to go to the thrift store.
As a kid?
Yeah, it was cool. I mean, punk rock was coming out. I mean, I got into punk rock at like age 10 or 11 through some skateboarders that were older around my area. And, you know, I'm seeing photos and reading things from Ian Mackay and, you know, Minor Threat and Bad Brains and all these dudes that they're just had that style too. So
when you get into your teen years and you're able to get into cars and drive, are you going to see shows and stuff? Because I know Maine's way north of where the full scene is, but you've got New York and DC that are within 7 hours. I don't know if you guys are traveling and into music like that.
Yeah, man, I was fortunate to be in it earlier because a lot of the punk shows, obviously some of the better bands were also straight edge. So I would jump in the car when I was 12, 13 and go see bands either locally, because we had Bowdoin College there. It would actually bring in some really good bands. Like the first punk rock show I saw was the Ramones when I was probably 13. It was sick. And then we would go to Boston. Boston was 2 hours. Boston was funny because it was a little more of a hardcore punk rock, but we definitely would go to Boston and the surrounding areas and see a bunch of really cool bands. Like Gang Green was a local Boston band, like really ripping. But it just got more harder edged and a little more intellectual the further south you went, a little more like belligerent up north, it felt like. But I liked that too. It was great. Got super into metal around the same time. I was at soccer camp with my best friend Adam, who also was my first skate homie, and learned to drop in at his house on a horrible mini ramp or quarter pipe. But regardless, I was at soccer camp. We were probably 12 or 13, and he put on Master of Puppets, and that was a defining moment. After like 5 notes, I'm like, holy shit, life has changed.
Yeah, that was a game-changing album for me as well. I mean, this is the early 80s, 85 maybe.
Yeah, I don't know when Master of Puppets came out, but then I ended up seeing them that next fall, and that was also a game-changing moment because still to this day, they're amazing, but they are epic. So I just looked it up. The album came out in 86, so I was 13 when I heard it.
Those were like Cliff Burton days.
I think, yeah, he recorded, that might have been the last album he was on. I think he died on the tour for that album.
So you're into metal, you're into punk, you're skateboarding a ton. I've heard of Topham, Maine because I know a guy from there who's got the craziest hands ever, and I believe you became friends with him at a young age, a guy named Matt Sickles.
Yep. He's actually from Brunswick, and he's across the river. So he was in a rival skate gang, but when we really came together was snowboarding. When we discovered that, we kind of... Dan Hobel was part of our crew, too. He was a skateboarder, famous skateboarder, and he was Matt's best friend. And Dan's dad was my hockey coach, one of my many hockey coaches. And once we found snowboarding, Sickles and I became really tight, and we would skip school and go all the time.
What kind of features are you skating back then? Because I would think it's drainage ditches, the shitty quarter pipes in your friend's backyard, but there's not skate parks everywhere back then.
There was no skate parks. The closest one was Boston, and I was fortunate enough where my grandparents lived in Maryland, and we would go to Ocean City almost every summer, and they had a really sick, like 12-foot high metal vert ramp there that I would skate.
Just burn yourself?
Yeah, it was harsh. But in Maine, there was nothing. It was really rough pavement. We would drive without our parents knowing it to Portland, Maine, or to Boston. And actually, Bowdoin College, of course, getting kicked out was a major issue, but like they had some nice stuff. And we would travel all over as kids just to go skate. It was awesome. And then in the winter, that was where snowboarding came from. It was we built mini ramps, like you were saying. We had a couple mini ramps around, and then winter would come and we would either shovel them off or the flat bottom would have ice, and it meant for some hard slams. But yeah, then one day Thrasher Mag shows up with a photo of probably Steve Caballero in it snowboarding, and I was like, ooh, what's that? So we saw those photos, and what we did at the time was, before we had snowboards, was we took our old skate decks, we took the trucks and wheels off, and we would turn them around backwards so the tail was a nose, and we would screw. Everybody had their own tech. I would screw wood screws through it so my boots would stick on there, and we would just go like shred down the hills on our old skateboards. And my other homies figured out how to put like old bike inner tubes on the top of the board so you could like strap your feet on. Then my homie Duncan, his older brother, came home from college with a Burton back hill, all wood. And we got like 2 feet, and I was a paper boy since I was like 9. So the second I tried that, I bought an Elite 140 right after, and it was over.
It was around 81-ish when you found snowboarding and Thrasher, and you're MacGyvering stuff, like you said. You buy your first board at 84, and then what's your first setup? The Elite was the board, but are you in Sorels? Is there even gear for a full setup?
They made gear. But we definitely, were kids. And my setup was an Elite 140 with not even Sorels. There was another cheaper brand called like Steel Shank or something. I can't remember. They were all rubber and miserable, and they had like wool liners. And I think we used those for a while. And then for Christmas, like that year, I got Burton made these racing gloves for like gate bashing, which the style back then was like neon and crazy. And I got these white gloves with yellow neon pads on them, and early on just running whatever we had for snow gear.
Where are you riding? Because there's not many places that
it wasn't open. Yeah, it wasn't open yet in Maine. I was fortunate enough to live right by a hill called Forsyth Hill, and it was just like a 200-foot hill, which is legit. I mean, we did that, and then there's even closer to my house, there was a hockey rink, an outdoor hockey rink with a hill right next to it. So they would plow this outdoor hockey rink and build snowbanks. And we started building like basically a hip jump there, and we would just session the shit out of it. And it was so much fun. Also behind my high school, there was a hill that had like really shitty cliffs on it. Like you'd land and immediately be in trees. But there was also this section where we built this jump, and we would get out of school and ride that thing till dark every day. And it was just the best times.
Is hockey still going on at this point too? And are you serious about hockey?
Yeah. I played hockey and was definitely serious about it, and played till I was 18. And also lacrosse. I played lacrosse. So I was really good at lacrosse, and I was decent at hockey. And yeah, I loved them all. And the crew in Maine, like the hockey team I had was filled with every type of kid. There's some white collar. They tended to be the worst players. And then you'd have the blue collar kids, which were a little tougher, and they were pretty good. And then we had some like fishermen that weren't that good at all because they didn't have the training, but they just wanted to go out on the ice and kick people's asses. So we had this really cool team of like misfits. I had a bunch of friends that just skateboarded. And they were, skateboard fashion at the time was like shaving your head, which is common now today, like shave part of your hair and wear crazy shit. But no one had done that before. We were breaking culture. And the kids I knew that skated, that didn't play hockey or do anything else, had a way harder time. Like these rednecks were after them constantly. And in my school, they were cool with me because I played hockey. Like, some dudes would start to talk shit and be like, no, he's cool. He plays hockey. He's good. So I got saved a lot. I also worked on the fishing wharf in the summer, so that helped me too.
So you're saved by sports and fishing. Were you a punk rock kid in high school? Like, what did you look like?
Yeah, I mean, pretty standard, jeans, Vans.
Leather jacket, studs, that kind of stuff?
No, I was more like Kurt Cobain stole my style.
Okay.
He was years after, and I was just emulating like Ian Mackay, like more simple, like Vans, Converse, jeans, t-shirt, skate t-shirt, and like an unbuttoned flannel, most likely a red and black one or something, just real classic.
Were you straight edge in high school? I know I heard you say something about seeing straight edge shows when you're young.
No, that was just fortunate. No, we all started drinking when we were like 11 or 12. Same time we started skateboarding, literally. Like I remember we would always go to this kid Jake Nelson's house, and he had the very first skateboard. So I'm sure you've seen the movie, or what's the movie with Michael J. Fox where he's skateboarding? Back to the Future?
Yeah.
So that movie came out. My homie he was skating, we were skating, and before Back to the Future came out, we were like one of 4 people in our whole school skateboarding. And then Back to the Future came out, and that kind of made it cool. And then our skate community jumped to like 30. But before Back to the Future came out, we were like just these kind of randos that somehow got a skateboard, and we would all share the same skateboard and at the same time sneak into his parents' liquor cabinet and like do shots. And then we were going camping at like 13 in the woods, and like, yeah, we were not straight edge.
What a different world, man, than today. I mean, where you live now, and I don't know anything about it, but where I live now, you couldn't be 13 and just go camping. The parent would never be like, hey, just go do that, just because the world's a crazy place now. But back then, you could do whatever you wanted, and it was pretty easy.
Yeah, it was definitely chill where we lived. And, a lot of us had our parents, we were fortunate, they moved to Maine for a reason too. So they all liked the outdoors. So my core group of friends all had parents that were into that kind of thing too. So we had already been schooled for years on that stuff. And, as long as they knew where we were going, we were fine.
The snowboard scene on the East Coast at that point, when you're coming up and and snowboarding's brand new, it's not like skiing and snowboarding are friendly by any means. I mean, there's some definite animosity that the kids today really don't know about compared to how it was back then. Did you ever see fights on the hill or anything like that?
It didn't pop off for me on that level until I moved to Colorado in 91. Around Maine, like you were saying, at first when we started, there was no resorts open, and then Sugarloaf opened one run, and then the next year Sunday River opened a run, and then eventually it became a lift. And yeah, the snowboarders, people were like, what the hell is that? And, people were freaked out by it, of course, but we never really got into weird stuff until the early 90s is when I started seeing it. And skiing at the time, there was all types of people that skied, but where I grew up in Maine, most of the people that skied were like blue collar, And then I moved out west, and you had more of a divide of cash, and the more, resorts were bigger. And also, I think at the time where snowboarding was at, the heroes were like in the movies. There was a very few media outlets, and the magazines weren't portraying it as much as the videos were. But like, you have like Mike Ranquick getting evicted from Japan, and like, some of that shit in the media too. So that sparked some of that as well. But yeah, there was definitely dicks. I was at Jackson Hole one time with Rocket Reeves and the early ride crew, and like we had altercations. There was other altercations at Breckenridge and other things, and it was usually caused by that typical 40-year-old guy that's competitive with the young 20-year-old guy, and the 20-year-old guy is like got something to prove or had an asshole brother or dad, and it was just typical crap. I think part of it was related to how we dressed and looked weird and different, and part of it was just the culture at the time. Like, people were more divided. So I think it's a mix of things.
Before I get into you moving into Colorado, I'm going to take a minute and I'm going to jump into my sponsors. My first sponsor is Evo, and if you haven't shopped at evo.com or been to one of their stores in Denver, Seattle, or Portland, you are missing out on the best retail and online experience in the country. While that's a bold statement, it's true. In-store, Evo creates an experience like no other. The staff is fully invested in the sports. They know the product and they're easy to talk to. There's no intimidating shop bros at Evo, just people who want you to enjoy you time. The stores themselves are created to be a gathering place, an art gallery, a movie venue, and a travel base with the goal of making your adventures more fun. On the web front, Evo offers a low price guarantee, free shipping on orders over $50, and a no-hassle return policy for everything ski, snowboard, bike, skate, lifestyle, and outerwear. On top of that, for listening to the show, they're going to give you an additional 10% off your entire order. When you check out, use the code capital TPM, the number 10, all one word, and you will get that 10% off your order. My next sponsor is Rescue Water, and they are proactive recovery. What does that mean? Well, there's no drink out there that's going to hydrate you better than a Rescue Water. It's science and it works. Think of it like this. When you need a pick-me-up, you drink a soda or a cup of coffee. But when you really need energy, you grab yourself an energy drink. Well, with Rescue Water, it's a similar principle. When you need to hydrate, like when you finish a workout, get done practice, or get off the mountain or trail, skip your sports drink and drink a cold Rescue Water. There's no better choice for replacing electrolytes, and it's a difference that you can feel. I like to drink a cold Rescue Water before bed after big nights out, and it's a lifesaver. No more Saturday morning headaches for me, and it's amazing how good I feel. Make Rescue Water work for you by heading over to rescuewater.com and save 20% on a 12-pack case by entering the code RESQ Water TPM. That's all one word, and you can find that over at rescuewater.com. Rescue Water is also available on Amazon and Amazon Prime. So those are my sponsors right there. And talking about you moving to Colorado, you graduate high school, and the goal is to go to college out there.
Yeah, I went to school in Fort Collins at CSU. Only reason I went to college is I wasn't ballsy enough to just say, hey, I want to go snowboarding, because from the time I was 15 in high school, I had a snowboard on my cover of my folder at school and told people, like, people would be like, what is that? And I'm like, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to be a pro snowboarder. And they're like, what's that? Like, so I moved to Colorado, didn't have the balls to tell my parents that I wanted to just do that. And, you know, my brother was on a much different track. My older brother was like Dartmouth and went on to Yale, and he's super intellectual and smart. And I was more of a physical person. And yeah, so I moved out there, did about a year and a half at college, took a semester off, never went back.
I heard a rumor, and it could be totally wrong, and you can correct me. Was there something going on with like a roommate selling weed or something in college?
Yeah, I mean, that was the rumor. Basically, there was a situation where I got marked as a drug dealer, which I wasn't, and basically had a issue with that at college, which was a nice catalyst. I mean, looking back, it was just a nice way to exit.
Did you drop out, get kicked out? What happened there?
No, actually, I got community service, and the school was...
Oh, you got in trouble?
Yeah, I got in trouble, and the school actually, they didn't take any action against me because I think they were concerned about the legalities of how it all went down. And I just basically got a plea bargain. Like, they were like, all right, there was some drug paraphernalia involved here, and that is a legal issue with the police. But as far as we're concerned, we don't want to get... So they were like totally cool and didn't put down the hammer on me at all. So I had my choice to come back or not. I had lawyers at the time that were like, you could probably sue them. And I was like, I don't really care. I just want to live my life. It was pretty cool too, because my community service, they ended up putting me into a recycling center, which I had already been into that because my little brother was way into that since he was like 8, organic and recycling. But it was a cool little caveat into something, you know, it's just a further continuation of how the realities of that. And that was cool. So
what do your parents have to say about all? Do they know what's going on at the time?
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Are they pissed or are they cool with you?
Yeah, they're fine. You know, you show up and see your kid scared as shit. There was no negative. It was just another way to become closer and be loved.
No, that's awesome, man, because some people could have their parents yelling at them, pissed off, and get the fuck out of my life. I'm glad you didn't have that.
Yeah, I got a really good set of cards.
So you moved to Breck after leaving school, and I'm guessing snowboarding's all you're about at that point. Like, that is life.
Yeah, I mean, I went back home to Maine, got in my car, drove to Colorado, and got to Breck. I had a Copper pass at the time. Copper was the place to be. You could go there on any given day and see Tarquin Robbins and his sister riding together, or all the Solid crew and Nate Coles and Dale Raybergs, even though most of those guys had moved to Vail already. But there was an insane snowboard culture, and it was nothing short of epic. I mean, the progression was going off. There was so many rippers. And I moved there with like $500 or $600 and was just living in my car. I didn't know anyone, had no plan. And one day I was riding the lift, and it was like a pretty rando day. I had $6 left. And, literally like the standard issue was we would go to Copper, and either we would wait for people to head for the trash can with their like half-eaten burger or pizza or whatever, and we'd be like, can I have that? And we'd just eat food out of the trash. At the time, the soup bar happened to be outside of the crackers, and the condiment bar was outside of the cafeteria. So we would go in and make these epic sandwiches of crackers and like relish. It was hilarious. So anyway, I'm on this lift, and I got $6 to my name, and I meet these two dudes, and they're like, hey man, you're ripping. Like, what's your name? We get to know each other. We took a few runs. They're like, hey, where do you live? We should shred. And I'm like, actually, I don't really live anywhere. They're like, oh, you trying to find a place? I'm like, yeah, but I only have $6. And they're like, well, fuck, come with us. And I moved up to Leadville first, which is one of the highest towns in America. And at the time, they might have been the only white people living there. It was almost all the migrant workers that came through to service Vail and all these places in the winter. So moved in with these dudes. They bought me a 40 every night, food every night. And then eventually I saved up, got a job in Breck cleaning toilets on Peak 10, and literally got a job over there, got a pass, moved into a 2-bedroom apartment with 8 other people. And just did the Breck thing. Did that for a couple of years, and then I got a job at Island Water Sports, being like a tech, fix boards, wax boards, all that kind of shit.
Sometimes in life, when you're living in that 2-bedroom apartment with 8 other people, you look back at it, and I don't know if you do, but you can look back and be like, those are some of the best times of my life, given I might have money and security now. But back then it was all partying and snowboarding. Is that how you look back on that time in your life?
Yeah, I mean, that whole Breck part was like really pre-sponsorship, and it was all about snowboarding and the love. And like, for me, honestly, it was about growing into someone with a little bit of confidence. Because when I moved to Colorado, I had 0 confidence. I was still a virgin. I was just terrified of people, and snowboarding was my way of expressing myself. And when I lived at that 2-bedroom, it was a mix of like some 30-year-old hippies and some kids my age and some punk rocker, just a weird mix of people. And it was something that needed to happen. I just dove into snowboarding 100% at that point. And then people started to see me, and I got that job at Island Water Sports because people were like, oh, this dude's totally in this shit and ripping, and they wanted me there. And then some reps took notice, and then I moved into probably the most formative house, which was on Peak 8. And I moved in with this kid named Spent, this girl Amy Wakefield, this kid Randy Walker, who ended up becoming the Volcom rep, all moved in. And we had built a mini ramp in the basement, and literally like skated every night. I got a job at Solid Snowboards, laying up snowboards, and I was making a ton of cash at Solid and buying beers for all my homies and skateboarding every night, getting drunk every night in the summer. And then in the winter, we snowboarded every day. That house was probably the time where I really would look back and say, holy fuck, that was one of the best times for snowboarding.
no responsibility, just snowboarding and not having to worry about the other bullshit that comes on later in life, which is good, but it adds a layer of complication to things.
For sure. And it was just, I kind of came into my own, and I had, no real responsibility. And I had my dream. At that time, I was working at Solid, like I was saying, and they were paying for every first quality snowboard. And they were such a shit show that they trained us and the previous guys before my partner and I teamed up to lay up boards because you had a partner. The previous record for first quality snowboards was like 8 in a day. So they were getting paid per first quality snowboard. So I was like, Tad, let's build a process. And we slowly built this process. And eventually him and I were making like between 30 and 40 first quality snowboards a day.
Damn.
And it took like 4 or 5 months for them to figure this out. And Homeboy and I were getting $2,500 checks every 2 weeks. Banking, and I would come home with a case of Mickey's 40s every night for all my homies, and we were just laughing. And I would also go to Maine in the summers and work on the fishing wharf and make enough money to pay rent for the whole winter pretty much. So I was like doing it,
So you had a good system going right there.
Good system, man.
Eventually you get noticed by Mac Dog, just like riding.
That was cool. I worked at Island, and Dale Rayberg lived in town. Or actually, no, the rep, this guy, Brad Albert, sold me a Dale Rayberg Pro Model. It was like the first season with the kicked noses. It was a horrible snowboard with no side cut, but it looked fucking rad. And I bought that snowboard, and then I was riding it, and I always wanted to hit this road gap that's up peak 10-ish, and it's off this like electrical box into this really steep run out. And so we were hitting that. And my homie was filming, and my buddy sent it into Transworld Video Magazine, which Mac Dog made at the time. And he was like, damn, who's this kid? And called up Ride and said, hey, I want to maybe film this kid. And Ride was like, well, there's no one on our team named that. So they started calling around, and they found me. And I got a call from the team manager, Jack Coughlin, Andy Coughlin's brother. And he said, hey, dude, we like what you're doing, would you like to ride for us? And he basically hooked me up with like $200 a month. And then a couple weeks later, I got a phone call from Whitey, who was making the other great movies at the time. And he's like, hey, we're going to Alaska. Do you want to come to film at Borderline Camp, which is where like Jesse Burtner and all these kids came from, Jason Borgstead. And we went up there and filmed a part in a couple weeks, and just kind of off to the races from there.
And that has to be mind-blowing to you, because you're a dude who's making $2,500 every 2 weeks, which is already mind-blowing because you're able to buy the beer. You've got self-confidence now. Everything's coming together. I don't want to say this is thrown in your lap, but you didn't do anything but ride. You just did what you love to do, and someone found you and got you paid. And then you're going to Alaska, which probably was on your list to check off. Man, in 20 years, I want to say I've gone to Alaska, and then you're going in a month. Your mind has to be going crazy right there.
Yes, I was fucking hyped and super tripping because the year before this all happened, Substance came out, which is one of Whitey's best movies, Ingmar Bergman's kind of premiere. And I watched Whitey's videos in slow motion. I mean, I'm not kidding you. In the summer, I would strap into my snowboard, watch the entire video parts in slow motion and do the movements and learn the tricks. So I get a call from this dude. But I will say, like, for the 3 or 4 years before that, there were many formative things that happened for me, whether it was me riding super hard and people taking notice. And also at the time where I grew up in the East Coast, number one, you don't talk about yourself. You don't promote yourself. You do your shit and people talk for you. And that's how I rolled. And I had really fortunate to have some people that looked out for me getting the job at Solid, getting the job at Island Water Sports. The ride rep didn't offer me the snowboard for $100 or whatever, just cause, he was like, wanted me riding that shit. And I think part of it was a long roll up. And then when it happened, I was blown away and I was fucking so stoked. And I definitely seized the opportunity when I got up there to Alaska, because it was spring. Most people were over it. And I just was like, fuck yeah, let's do this shit. And tried to throw something down and it worked out. So it was really, really amazing.
You're put on the map at this point. People starting to know who you are. You're getting video parts. You eventually decide to pack it up in Colorado and move to Utah. And that's around 2000-ish. What prompts that move? Is it the lack of steepness?
It was Whitey and I had become homies and really formed like a good working relationship. And his crew there was like Stevie Alters and J2 and some of the older ride guys. And a lot of these people were like fading out or partying too much. And Whitey saw the early Salt Lake days of talent that was budding there. And the terrain, honestly, like, is so much better in Utah for what we were into. He's like, do you want to move? I'm like, hell yeah. So Whitey and I moved in together. Cody Dresser was our other roommate. We got out there and I started riding Brighton. Oh, sorry. I lied. I did move with Whitey, but he kept his own place for the first season. And I moved in with Brandon Ruff, like Ride set up a house for us. So I moved in with Brandon Ruff, who was like the OG kind of new school kid at the time. You know, Colorado, we rode park. We rode a little bit of powder, a lot of trees, but like there's not a lot of like cliffs you can hit in runs out there that are like good landings and stuff. So
you don't need good landings though. I've seen you ride.
Yeah, but I mean, I learned that in Colorado, but like Brandon Ruff taught me how to ride powder and jump cliffs, and that was a really fortunate time. But yeah, Whitey sparked that move and I was really stoked. And then, you know, that first season at Brighton, I started riding with Brandon. He got hurt. And then I met up with JP Walker. I started hearing about this kid, JP Walker, and finally got to shred with him and talked him into filming with Whitey. And that was a fucking awesome time.
And that whole crew with JP, I mean, is it like that whole forum crew that you're with?
Yeah, this was pre-forum when I met JP.
Okay.
They were all on Rev at the time, which is the guys that kind of invented that slider system that Burton now uses.
Okay.
So they were all on Rev, and I was filming with MacDog and Whitey, doing 2 parts a year with different companies. And I was homies with Peter, sort of, and I was like, hey, I was with MacDog and Peter on this trip, and I was like, hey, dudes, I know you're putting Bjorn on the team, and that's rad because he's sick, but there's this kid, JP Walker, that you need to really look at if you want to get the best dude. And so they were like, yeah, we've heard of that guy. And like, they came out and filmed with him for one day, and the next day he was on forum.
That is pretty amazing. I did not know that.
Yeah, it was cool. And so, yeah, man, the forum thing kind of happened after. But man, yeah, that move to Utah was epic. And also one day there's kind of another kind of epic story about Whitey and JP and Jeremy. And I think this was even pre-forum too. We were coming down the Brighton Canyon and there's this really shitty handrail at this little like spot that's like a pull-off picnic spot. And Whitey was like, dudes, you know, handrails have been dead. They had died off a couple years before, and like people were not running them in the mags and videos weren't using them. No one was riding them. And Whitey was like, dude, rails are rad. Like, let's bring those back. So we're like, fuck yeah. So I remember getting out of Whitey's van and JP, Jeremy, and I think maybe Mitch Nelson or someone else was there, and we all just shredded this handrail. And we all got way into it after that and started going hard on the handrails.
In looking at your riding style over the years, you started riding at a time when people did everything.
Yeah.
There was no, I'm going to be a slope style guy, or I'm going to focus on the backcountry. You rode wherever you possibly could because there weren't that many choices, and you were going to do whatever was out there. So half pipe you rode, building backcountry jumps wherever you could, you did. Riding powder you did. Handrails, you did that as well. What do you think about all the specialty of riders today compared to the guys like yourself who grew up riding everything?
I get it, because you have to specialize. It's like, if you're going to be Shaun White and throw down that perfect run in the gold medal thing he just did, love him or hate him, like, I don't think you could go out and film a rail part and do that. Like, Jed Anderson is probably the last of the breed that I think we'll see for a while. To me, he's the best handrail rider of all time, and he also was a prodigy in the half pipe. And you either have to be like crazy special, but even with Jed, like he never cared enough to ride the pipe to go take out a Shaun White or whoever. A guy like Ben Ferguson, who's probably everyone's current favorite in the half pipe, then he puts out like a minute part in Absinthe, and he blew my mind. I was like, damn, this dude's got epic backcountry style. And he is going to transition to backcountry freestyle snowboarding really well, whereas like some other guys have been dominant in the half pipe. I've seen him ride the backcountry, and it doesn't work for me, at least, watching it. He's the right kind of kid. He grew up in Bend. They probably had a half pipe, but they definitely had a lot of other shit. So, you know, there's a couple freak shows out there that might do a couple things. But in general, yeah, I think the specialty is kind of where it's at, you know?
What do you think of competition? You brought up the Olympics, or you brought up Shaun White's run. What do you think of where competition has come? Because when you were coming up at competitions, there's likely to be a dude slamming a beer somewhere, likely to be a dude smoking a joint somewhere, then dropping in his run. Today, none of that shit happens. These guys are serious. They're athletes. Is that good or bad for snowboarding?
I think it's personal. The kids that are like super into that competition, I think there's a lot of different reasons people do it. Some do it just because they want to get noticed. Some do it for money. Some do it because they love it, and maybe a mixture of all three. And like, I get it. If you're like gonna do what some of those dudes do in the half pipe, you probably don't want to be drunk.
Yeah, totally.
I would think that maybe some other substances could actually improve your performance, depending on who you were and your makeup.
How you handled it.
Yeah, I know a lot of those half-pipe riders smoke weed, and I know probably a lot of them have done LSD and mushrooms, and those are things that I could consider performance enhancers if used correctly. However, when it gets to be the Olympics, which I consider just another contest with a bunch of rules added to it, like the drug testing and shit, it's just another contest. But on an outsider's perspective, when Red Gerard wins the X Games slopestyle, he's not on fucking Conan or whoever else, you know?
Yeah.
So it's on a big stage. If you do well there, it can set you up pretty nicely. So I'm stoked for Shaun. I'm stoked for Red and Jamie and all these people and Britta, who's actually used to ski for Holden. I was so stoked for her. And
we talked about you in our interview.
Yeah, she's sweet. I mean, I'm so happy for her, man. She is such a sweetheart. And you know, it's really hard as a woman in snowboarding, but maybe even harder in skiing to get any notoriety. So I was just stoked for her, especially just knowing her personality too. She's just so kind.
And the injuries she's battled for the past 10 years, for her to put a season together like this and walk away with a medal is awesome.
It's so awesome. So stoked for her. And long story short, I think if you're having a blast, it's awesome. I prefer filming. I was in a few contests that were epic to be in, but I like being with like 3 or 4 people. I was never really into, like, some people totally get pumped. A Daniel Frank or even a Shaun White, or they thrive on like either the competition with themselves or others, or they thrive on the attention.
Yep. Daniel
would like lived for attention. That would pump him up. Whereas I would like start to cringe and be like, I'd ride so much worse. So like, then the second you put a helmet on me, I would never fall on my head. But the second I put a helmet on, next thing you know, I'm like doing a head spin down the fucking landing. It's like, it's horrible. Like, I hate contests personally, but some people dig it. It's cool.
There's a competitive spirit in some people that needs to come out. Contests serve that. I'm going to jump into one more set of sponsors real quick. And my final sponsor, brews beer, drinks beer, and has fun doing it, period. They're the 10 Barrel Brewery based out of Bend, Oregon. They live and breathe the ski and snowboard culture and support it with tasty beers like their new Goggle Tan IRA and supporting nonprofits like Jeremy Jones's Protect Our Winters Foundation. But the support of snow does not stop there. March is a huge month for 10 Barrel as they're holding their final Hella Big Air event March 31st at Mount Bachelor. Yes, they're bringing it home and it's going to be an amazing time. The weekend is full of fun and it'll be highlighted by some amazing athletes hucking themselves to get their hands on some of that $30,000 in prize money. If you're an athlete and specialize in big air, go take some of that money by making sure you're at Mount Bachelor on the 31st. And afterwards, you can join the 10 Barrel crew doing what they do best, drinking beer outside. If you ski or snowboard, support the beer that supports you, the 10 Barrel Brewery. Find out more about the Hella Big Air event and the beer over at 10barrel.com. Those are my sponsors, so we'll get back into it. In your life, when does snowboarding and money collide? You're getting the $200 a month from Ride early on, but in terms of sponsorship, you had a ton of sponsors over your career, and I don't think we need to go through all your sponsors, but I want to think in terms of your best year as a professional snowboarder, and you were a pro snowboarder in some of the salad days, I would think, where there's a lot of money. How much was the most you think you could make on paper being a pro snowboarder?
Well, I think the most eye-opening moment for me was when I was making nothing, and I went to Todd Richards' house. And my friend Tony, who's a notorious dickhead, but awesome, was like, "Hey, Mikey, come over here." And he's like going through his papers on his desk, and he moves one over, and exposes this check from Morrow Snowboards for $325,000.
Holy shit.
And that was his board royalty.
No way.
And, I was like, whoa. And then that wasn't my motivation still from that, whatever. I just kept my head down, kept going. And, I had opportunities to go head to toe with Burton and turn those down for like an obvious choice of having like 6 or 7 other sponsors that supported me financially. And I think my best year, I probably was up around the 250 range.
That's awesome.
Yeah. And it's like now I was just talking to someone the other day about like good for like a A-grade snowboarder, unless you're one of 10 people right now, is like 30 grand a year.
Yeah. I mean, 250 grand is ridiculous from the people I've talked to. It just doesn't happen these days.
Yeah. I was like at the top of the thing, I think, at the scale, because I was also business minded and pretty smart with kind of how I played the cards and worked the different sponsors. And I had an agent for some and not for others. And, there was also other things happening, like random shit, like video games, where you would literally get a check for like 25 grand and not do anything. They'd put your name, put you in a fucking video game. And that was cool. I mean, that was fucking insane. And like looking back, it was awesome. And that didn't last long. I mean, it was good for a while.
I look at snowboarding as the bar was set high really early, where if you look at skiers, they never got paid. So none of them ever expected to.
Yeah.
But in snowboarding, in the beginning, there was a lot of money thrown at snowboarders because it was the hottest commodity out there. I mean, people wanted to use that image to sell everything, and people knew it, and snowboards were selling like hotcakes. I think at that first trade show, there was like 300 snowboard brands there, and the money was flowing. And then what happens when that 250 becomes 60? Is that an eye-opening moment?
It wasn't as much for me because I buffered my shock of that with starting Holden with about 6 or 7 years left in my snowboard career. So that started paying me. I started making a few movies here and there. So it wasn't as much of a shock for me. It definitely got nicked significantly, but it wasn't like pulled out of the rug. And I also had some good mentors, and early in your career, you roll the dice and have a couple short-term 1 to 2 year deals that you prove yourself, or you're biding time. And then as you get older, you look for those longer deals and you start to like ride it out once you've proven yourself. I had my eyes open, basically. I definitely saw other people get completely blindsided, and, that's their fault.
Yeah, I mean, you've got to see it coming at some point. Throughout your career, you've filmed. I'm not going to talk about all your video parts, but from technical difficulties to videographs to Absinthe, you've filmed with a lot of people, put down a lot of parts, and I'm going to skip over all those because people should go to the internet, find your parts, watch them, and I'm going to fast forward a little bit. You break your neck in 2003, and how do you do that?
I just was riding in the half pipe at Mount Hood. As you know, they like to salt those pipes.
Yep.
And I was doing cab 7s, pretty big, probably like 8 feet out, which in the pipes back then, they were like 12 feet tall or something, or some 15. So that was pretty high. And I went for a 9. No, I think I went for 10. And I went and caught my nose on the takeoff and got bucked into the flats onto my neck and just broke my neck. And It still bothers me today.
When you break your neck, I mean, it just sounds terrible. I mean, what did the doctor say and how did they fix that?
They didn't say anything because I never went.
Did you have health insurance?
Nope.
I wouldn't have gone either.
So I just literally went home and didn't move my head more than like a half an inch side to side for like 8 or 9 months, and slowly started to rehab it myself, and still don't have complete movement, but I can only imagine what I would have done. And the bill, I probably would have had $50,000-$60,000 bill. They might have fused some shit. I probably would be crippled today. And I have avoided so many sketchy doctors and surgeries over my career. I've had 5 or 6 opportunities to choose surgery, and I never did it. And I'm so thankful.
What are the other major injuries that you've had?
Broke my femur, broke all 4 bones in my left foot, blew out both shoulders multiple times, broke my arms, definitely been knocked out quite a few times. But the big ones were, I avoided a foot surgery where the guy wanted to, basically would have ended my career. Shoulders, I was fortunate. I found the best doctor in Salt Lake, or one of the best, and he was completely anti-surgery, and he was the jazz's doctor.
Okay.
He wasn't the traveling doctor. He was the guy that would like say yes or no on surgery, and he was super anti and just was like, dude, we're going to rehab this shit. You're going to be good. And so fortunate to find him.
You're known for doing gigantic gaps to flat. And one thing we didn't talk about was teeth.
Mm-hmm.
Have you blown up a lot of teeth in your day?
Fuck, so many, dude. I have broken so many teeth. I eventually got smart and started bringing a mouth guard to the big ollies, or I would just, if I forgot it, I would like rip up a t-shirt and stick the cloth in my mouth. It also helps, as they know now, with minor concussions, which is good.
Yeah. Some of those gaps, when I see you land in a little buckle, for some reason I think about teeth a lot.
Yeah, I broke a shitload of teeth before I was smart enough to learn my lesson. I remember one of the best ones was I was trying to do a switch front board on this 20 stair. Devin Walsh was there and Dave Downing was there. And I flipped out and my front tooth, just to the right of my front upper tooth, slid down the rail like 6 feet, and the smell of what you smell at the dentist when they're grinding your teeth was the smell.
Oh.
And there was a white line that looked like someone took chalk for like 5 feet down that rusty ass handrail. Miserable.
Those are ones that you have to go in and get fixed.
Yeah.
You probably have big dental bills.
Luckily, I had a buddy that was a dentist, and he would do it for me for cheap. And if I went without Novocaine, he would do it for like a fraction.
Oh. Did you go out without Novocaine all the time?
Couple times, yeah.
Jesus Christ.
I tried it on a root canal, and that was the limit. I was like, fuck no. But the basic like capping I would do.
That means you have a high pain tolerance, and you need to for what you do. You know, moving to 2004, I would say it's the biggest year of your life on paper because there's so many things that are happening. And I think the first thing to talk about is how Holden became a reality. And I think you dream it up in 2002, but 2 years later, you make it happen. And why do you have the idea of an outerwear company? Is it the products in the market aren't right for you?
Just to backtrack real quick, I was riding for Volcom in 2000, and I started, Holden launched its first collection in 2002.
Oh, okay.
But yeah, I was getting boxes from Volcom and whoever else. And also just looking around, and it wasn't just me. There was other people hemming and hawing and how corny this shit was. You know, Scotty Whitlake and I, you know, we would drunk text each other every night, and we were homies and a bunch of other homies. And, you know, we were riding thrift store shit when we weren't filming and just trying to like, we were mostly influenced by skateboard videos, you know. Through my whole snowboard career, I was like, early on, before I was sponsored, I watched snowboard videos, and after that, I didn't. I watched only skateboard videos and got inspired from that. And so I was emulating skate and doing that thing, and we were like, fuck, can't someone just make shit that looks like either thrift store shit that's waterproof or just really cool looking, kind of styly with some good fit? And so that's where it was born. And then I was riding for M3, and my homie Scott was there, and he and I got to do a little sportswear collection for them. And I was like, dude, this guy can design. He's good. So I initially started the brand with Chris Miller, who's the famous skateboarder.
Which had to be cool for you because you knew of Chris Miller when you were like 12.
Dude, I had his poster on my wall, like with the pink helmet doing the fucking frontside air around the corner at Uplands. Since I was a kid. And so, yes, that was dope. And we got a license deal with Audio and Planet Earth before they got bought. And so I get it started with Chris Miller, bring my homie Scott in. We set out and did it.
When you say you set out and did it, there's a lot of investment that has to come. I mean, is Chris Miller a money guy here? Or are you the money guy? Or how does it all come together? Because you come with the idea and you have a designer, which is great. You've got a great brand vision, but somebody has to pay for the clothes.
Yeah, that's what Chris was awesome for. He founded Planet Earth. I don't know the ins and outs of his thing, but I do know that he was still basically the president, but there were money guys involved as well. And at the time, skateboard shoes were the cool thing.
Audio is killing it.
They were doing like 250 mil a year or some shit, like crazy huge. Maybe not that much. However much it was huge. They had Tony Hawk and Shaun White on their team. Like, it was ridiculous.
Yeah.
So they had a ton of cash. Chris helped set up a license deal that basically funded, and it was amazing because we got going and we were so under the radar there that Scotty and I, who were actually doing the day-to-day, had zero constraints. We were just experimenting. I remember the first collection, we designed it. They had no visibility. The samples showed up in Southern California. Scott and I were in Portland, Oregon doing this shit. And we got a phone call from Chris Miller, and he was laughing his head off at the collection we sent. We hadn't even seen the samples, and he opens the box and sees Snowboarding's first striped jacket. And he's like, this is so dumb. You know, he didn't say dumb, but he was laughing in our faces about the world's first snowboard striped coat. And the Whitleg pant, which is like got metal zippers all over it and leather shit and blah, blah, blah. And he's like laughing. Of course, those end up being the most copied items for years to come. But yeah, I mean, we had an unlimited budget, dude, and it was fucking epic. And like Planet Earth was distributing our brand. Our shit was last to ship out of the warehouse, last to show up, but the bills got paid. So basically the way we looked at the first 4 to 5 years was we got a free education. We didn't know anything about technical outerwear. We went over to Asia a bunch. At the time, all the brands pretty much were buying available fabrics. We didn't want to use available fabrics because we wanted our shit to look like streetwear. So we were learning how to make fabric. We were learning how to make tweeds and crazy looking shit. Chambray fabrics, and we developed the world's first waterproof breathable hemp fabric, which won a bunch of awards, and just got a free education due to this license deal.
Well, that's a nice little thing to have there where you're really not at risk and you can create what you want. You also start up Kids Know distribution. Is that something that you set up so you can control your own distribution with the clothing, or is that for other products?
We started Kids Know video.
So it's video, not just
We did 2 videos. One was called Love Hate and one was called Burning Bridges. That was me and this kid Shelby Menzel. We made those movies. And then after that, I started Kids Know distribution with basically this dude, Kyle Kennedy. And that was sort of to help distribute. It was later on once we had started Videograss. And I started Videograss with the kids from Ashbury, Lance and Mike and Nima and Daryl Mathis and Justin Meyer, who currently runs and still owns it. So after Videograss was started, distribution was dying. There was nowhere to distribute your shit. There was a couple spots, but they were really cheesy. So I started it and had to fight for bigger guys like Absinthe. This is while DVDs were still relevant, which they probably aren't now. But at the time, people were still shipping a good amount of DVDs, and I had to fight for talking to Justin at Absinthe, for example. He was super like, whoa, like, you're trying to make money off me. I'm like, no, man, I'm actually just trying to fucking get your shit in the store and not have you ripped off, and me too. So basically I started it, ran it for a year, gave it to Kyle Kennedy to run with it because I didn't want to own another business. I just wanted to have a fair distribution spot for that culture to continue.
Video action sports of the past, the people that used to distribute movies, they bent people over and took a lot of money from people. So it sounds like you were trying to do the snowboarder friendly, hey, we're going to build the sport. You're going to make a little cut too, but it's not like you're going to make video action sports as dollars. We
honestly barely made enough to keep going. And I also would turn people on to like, hey dude, instead of paying these guys $3 to make your DVD case, here's my dude that'll do it for 57 cents. You know what I mean? Just like trying to spread the love. And, you know, a lot of creatives don't have a business mindset to like dive in. They kind of get overwhelmed by what they're already doing. So I was just like, all right, like, I can figure this shit out.
So you're a shared resource for people.
That's what we tried to be, yeah.
Like you said, you produced your own movie, Love, Hate. There's a rollerblading clip in that one.
Yeah.
It's also really a raw, real look at life. I'd say lots of smoking cigarettes, lots of fun, but totally different vibe than most snowboard films that you see at that point. I think you brought in a skateboard guy to edit it who had no snowboard experience, which probably makes it feel like that. But is the skate video what you're trying to produce for snowboarding?
Pretty much, yeah. It was a mix. It's a lot harder to get lifestyle in a snowboard way. You know, there were a lot of video companies doing the interview, like, and it was so painful. It was like, the standard format was, here's this pro snowboarder talking about another pro snowboarder, and the conversation would go like this. So what do you think of Joey Thompson? Oh, Joey Thompson's so sick. Like, he just rips. He's like super cool and funny, but there's no lifestyle. And so when I brought in this kid, Shelby, who made a bunch of cult skateboard movies in Salt Lake, he wouldn't ever do that to start with. But secondly, he would rather kill himself than put that shit in there. And so I brought the technical know-how of the snowboarding. I brought the athletes. I brought the budget. I was like, dude, you're going to make more money than you ever made. Just fucking edit this like a skate video. But he also had a natural talent for shooting hilarious shit and bringing people's real personalities to light. And that was the goal. The closest thing to us before that was Whiskey, but that was a little more conjured. There were some real shit in there, like the Jimmy Holopaugh fight sequence was played up, but that was real. That was an inspiration partially, but it was mostly skate videos, like you're saying, and just like more of a documentary approach to what we were about. And we also tried to bring in a wide breadth. Like, if I had just put the Holden guys in there, it would have been mostly rails, but I went after like Mark Frank and brought in this like gangster element with him and brought in some other types of riders that didn't ride for us and more sponsor dollars too. So we did good on those. We sold like quite a few copies of Love, Hate, and Burning Bridges. So
as we move forward into Holden, I don't know if Holden's acquired, but Earth products are acquired by K2 and then Jarden acquires K2. How does that affect you? Because you've got this business, Holden, that's under this Earth umbrella, and it sounds like a big corporate guy buys the Earth umbrella. How does that impact you?
So Jarden bought them. When anybody buys a brand with a bunch of brands, they're like, okay, well, what did we just buy?
Right.
They're a $6 billion brand that bought a bunch of shit, and then they get down on the balance sheet and they're like, wait, what's this license? Like, this is the only brand licensed under this $6 billion umbrella. So these dudes, this new guy they bring in, Jeff, who was great to us, not necessarily financially, but just like really nice to work with, comes in and hits us up. And he's like, hey guys, like, you know, the CEO of Jarden wants to meet you guys. So we meet with them. And long story short, they say, here's this 8-year license deal. And we're only like 4.5 years in. And they're like, well, what do you guys want to do? Do you want us to buy you? Do you want us to pay to go away? And we're like, well, what does it look like to get paid to go away? And they basically paid us a royalty to leave. And Scott and I were like, fuck yeah, we got this much money.
So you were bought by a corporate monster who paid you to leave.
But at the time, my business partner, Chris Miller, and I, he was on to different projects. It was clear that we weren't meant to be business partners.
Okay.
And so 2/3 of that money paid him to go away immediately after that. So after that, we're sitting there with like a couple $100,000. I've got money from my snowboard career saved up and just start dropping it in and going hard. And Scott is a struggling artist. He's got no money. My older brother put in some cash. So for the next 4 to 5 years, self-funded. And the beauty of that was probably 06 when the Jarden thing happened, 06, 07. So we get about a year and a half in. I've got my loot in, got some family money in. Things are going pretty good. We're growing. Bam, recession hits.
Oh, yeah.
So I've got my first real go around at a collection coming in, and I'm getting calls for people like, hey, I got to cancel my $300,000 order. and I got to cancel my order, and we're fucked, and these people are out of business, and So shit lines up. We survive because we're fighters. Banks won't give us a dime. Our taxes show that we're not worthy to get money. So basically all my snowboard money goes away. We're just struggling. And finally a bank lends us on a rolling credit line, like $100,000, but it was just enough to keep the lights on and stuff. So we've been through many trials and tribs, and to keep it, unless you want to know more, I'm happy to talk to any of it. Through that process, we ended up bringing on another bank down the line that ended up taking the brand, then allowed me to sell it to another group, which then we were doing well under, but they were foreclosed on because we were under an umbrella of brands, which then they were foreclosed on. And I just most recently sold the brand for that bank to our current partner. And right now we're in the best situation we've ever been in with a financial partner.
Confusing, but you're in a great place. So that's all that matters.
Yeah, it feels good.
So 2008, you work with the Hackers and Nima and make Videograss happen. Once it came out, it was the talk of snowboarding. Were you surprised with how well that did from the start?
I mean, honestly, I wasn't surprised, which may sound kind of lame, but I really wasn't, because we brought in this kid, Justin Meyer, who I took the word of the Hackers on, and I'd seen some of his stuff, but he was the guy behind Videograss on the day-to-day level, and that dude is such a fucking hard worker. He edits faster and more efficiently, knows how to have fun. And then the Hackers brought Lance as a master of people and the kids and like the dad and like cool. And I was the guy that brought like, here's how we execute and make shit happen. And Daryl Mathis was in there too, kind of helping out with the riders and making sure the shit was moving and leading the charge on the crews and stuff like that. And so through all of our collected connections, we were able to bring in the best people in that realm, which was primarily street snowboarding, and bring in, you know, again, a little bit of that love-hate vibe of like just the real shit, the funny stuff. So no, I wasn't that surprised. I think we all kind of expected what we were going to do. You know, we were all stoked, and I think kids were psyched, which made us happy for sure.
What you're known for, I want to say it was the second movie with Videograss, was the 44, 48 step ollie. I would say the most insane clip of your career, but that would be for you to say.
To me, it was one of my top three for sure. And I would say as far as ollies, definitely the most insane thing. And it was, yeah, that's in my top three for sure.
It's one of those things where when you're walking around that campus or wherever you are you with some friends, you see that stair set and you're like, oh, I got this, and everybody just laughs at you?
Yeah, well, you know, it was cool. Honestly, I'd been looking for that stair set for like 3 years because I had done a bunch of big ollies and I was like, kind of knew what I could do, but I wanted to find something about 10 feet higher, and I didn't necessarily want it to be as far as the one we found, but I think that's what actually made it landable with physics. But I wanted to find something about 10 feet higher than I'd ever done and really push my limits. And I was in Big Bear for an Ashbury demo, and someone was like, dude, have you seen the set at the middle school? And we go there. I was with Joe Carlino, who was not making Videograss. He was making, I think, a Transworld movie. But I happened to say, oh, fuck, I can do this. And I like kind of heard myself say it and doubted myself about 95% that I could do it. And then the next day after the demo, I had a couple, like a Guinness, and I took a nap, and Joe Carlino wakes me up and he's like, hey dude, let's go do that ollie. And I'm like, okay, let's go check it out. And we go there and set it up, got kicked out by the cops. They said, hey, if you come back, we're going to arrest you. Of course, we went back like 2 hours later and set it up, and we had the coolest crew, and it was awesome because I really was looking for it for like 3 years, and I finally knew like this was the one that was probably near the max. I don't know if it was the max, but that was near it for sure.
That's your only trick in that movie, but the one that everyone remembers from that movie. It just puts a stamp on everything that you've done and takes it to another level. And you're what, 37 years old when you do that?
Yeah, I think around that. That was it. I mean, I retired after that pretty much. So I was just like, that kind of marked the end of what I felt like I needed to do.
I think once you see that, maybe we'll see something bigger at some point, but I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know either. I hope so. I mean, it'd be rad if someone did it. But I was so happy to end it that way. I could have definitely milked my career a lot longer and faded out, but I'd already kind of been doing that. Like, honestly, you said it. I only had one shot that year. I didn't film all year. I just wasn't feeling it. And then I went to this demo, and it's like April, and I was like, fuck. I had a sense of guilt because my sponsors, Ride had been particularly good to me at the end of my career. But really, it was this like little bit of guilt and then a lot of like, ooh, I want to fucking see what I can do. And it was a great way to end it. Like when I landed it, it became the best party I'd been to in years too. So there was like it was the Ashbury demo. So it was like all these badass young shredders were there. And it was just the coolest way to celebrate the way out. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and I would say it's got to be a weird feeling. I mean, I'm sure you've experienced it before, but when you have 30 people at a spot, there's only one person snowboarding, and that's you. It's just got to be weird. Like, everybody's just chilling, smoking cigarettes, doing whatever they're doing, waiting on you.
It was awesome, man. Like, Ben Beloke was down there, and a bunch of other homies, like, digging and fixing the landing, and it was a double bungee to get speed. So, 2 bungees. I had Louis and, like, a couple other homies. The kid that just made the new, not the Vans video. Yeah, I think it was the Vans video. He was there pulling, and that, like, he's told me before that inspired him to make movies, which was cool. But Louis being there at the top, like, there's no way I would have done the trick without him there. So not having that family, like, that's what pushed me. Like Jed Anderson on the side of the rail. He's the guy that runs down at the end of the clip. And him, every time I'm going up, because he's an animal and he doesn't say shit unless he means it. And he'd be like, you can do this shit. And before I made the make on that, I hit it like 4 or 5 times. Came close once. The janitor comes out. He says, hey, the cops are on the way. So we're like, oh, fuck. The reason why we didn't really get a good photo of it is that Kevin Zacher was there, but he got scared and wanted to leave because he thought he was going to get arrested.
Huh.
But Louis at the top, once I knew the cops were coming, I had a little bit of panic, and him being the homie, I was like, okay, ready. He's like, you're not ready. Slow down, take some breaths. When you're ready, drop in. Honestly, if he wasn't there, I don't think I would have landed that shit. But that's snowboarding. That's why I love filming. It's like this dope camaraderie. I'd never filmed with Louis before that. I probably never will again. But there's just like this filming kind of understanding. And that's probably why he just put out the best movie of last year as well. As he's a very connected person. But yeah, that was a rad moment, dude. Really rad.
You can't help but smile and want to just high-five somebody when you watch that clip because it's just so insane.
Yeah. Yeah, it was fun.
I have more, but I've kept you for a long time, so I'm going to jump into the final part of the interview, which is inappropriate questions.
Killer.
With this one, I had Matt Sickles, who was your former team manager at Ride Snowboards, come up with 3 questions.
Hilarious.
Can you describe Matt Sickles' hand real quick for people who don't know him?
Yes. Fun fact, Matt Sickles' hands have no middle fingers. He's got one hand with a normal pinky, a decent-sized ring finger, and a double-sized pointer finger and a pretty normal thumb. So it looks like, kind of like an alien hand. And then on the right hand, it's even more special. I think it's the right hand. He has a tiny pinky, which is called Inca. And that's attached with skin to his ring finger, which is about normal size. And then you come to the pointer finger, which is called the Punisher. And the knuckle on the Punisher is, no joke, about the size of a racquetball, maybe a little smaller. It's huge, and it's called the Punisher. And then the thumb, his grandfather had the exact same hand. So in his family, this skips a generation. I believe his niece has it too. But his grandfather's custom leather gloves fit him. It's really cool.
So if you ever see Matt, make sure you check out his hands. Girls, don't be scared. Now we will jump into inappropriate questions.
Okay.
Let's see. Inappropriate questions. This is a tough one because surprisingly I have very little dirt on Mikey over all these years. So,
and you've known him since you were what, like 16?
Probably about that. Yeah. Mid-80s, early mid-80s. went to rival high schools in Brunswick and Topsom, Maine. And I think we met through a girl that we both knew, and she knew we were both into skateboarding and snowboarding, and I think we started skating together. And then when snowboarding started to happen, I think my first days of snowboarding were really with Mikey and a few other friends back in Maine.
Oh, that's pretty cool. And when he comes back on ride after a bunch of years, you're the one who brings him back on.
It was really cool how it worked out. We were both out in Salt Lake at the time. I was working at Milo Sport in Salt Lake City, and Mikey was out in Salt Lake, and I was offered the job at Ride, and they were all stoked on the idea of getting Mikey back on the team. And of course, that was a big priority for me, and it was a good time for Mikey as well. So it all kind of fell into place, and it was, an awesome adventure. And to kind of come back full circle after some years and meet back up on the Ride team, it was kind of like a dream come true in a lot of ways.
Let's give him question number 1 for inappropriate questions.
Okay. This is going to be pretty much all work-related, industry-related stuff because, like I said, unfortunately, I just don't have any good, dirt material on Mike. He's pretty guarded in that respect. But let's see what I could dig into here. Number 1, what was the most devastating transition in sponsorships over the years? You'd been on Solid, Ride, Division 23, M3, or even with Holden. Was there at any point you felt really fucked over or had to fuck someone over to get where you were going?
I like that. I'm sure there'll be some jargon in there because if anybody fucks anybody over, it's those guys. So good question. Have you been fucked over by sponsors or anybody in your career, or have you had to fuck anybody over to get where you are today?
Well, it's funny that Matt was with Ride, and I wouldn't say I fucked Ride over when I left the first time, but basically Ride had a pretty deep balance sheet with the big shots, and they were paying me $200 a month, and I got an offer for $2,000 from D23. And I was like, guys, you want to match this or I'm leaving? And they're like, no. So I left. There was one other one that I will talk about too, which I rode for Scott Goggles for a while.
Cool brand.
Whoever the team manager was at the time, we were not feeling each other. It was kind of cool because near the end, after about a year and a half of me giving them a bunch of design ideas that they said that weren't possible, that were then in their collection 5 years later, the team manager and I just both agreed, basically, we might have even said these words, but I don't really like you and you don't really like me, so why don't we just call this? Because we didn't. Every time we were on the phone with each other, I'm sure to one another, it was fingers on the fucking chalkboard. I thought he was the biggest kook in the world, and he definitely thought I was just a fucking douchebag snowboarder. So that was probably the most aggressive one. Everybody else was great, man. I had fucking awesome sponsors the whole way through. Yeah, all of them were great.
Is the Scott guy still in the industry?
I have no idea.
So I'm going to say no. All right, so I'm going to go to question number 2 from Sickles.
Let's see. What was the most embarrassing moment in snowboarding? Either a time where you were just out of your element and had to puss out on a shoot, or a interview you regret saying something, anything you really wish never happened?
Regrets. Do you have any?
The embarrassing thing is interesting. Regrets. I don't know. Embarrassing. Let me think about this for a second. I will say the only time my mother ever has seen me physically snowboard was at a contest that my sponsor forced me to go to. And it was at the US Open Big Air or something. And it was at night. And I told you earlier in the interview about wearing helmets, my mom's never seen me snowboard. I didn't do practice, just show up to the event. I was like, all right, where do you drop in? Went, tried a switch backside rodeo 5 and literally landed on my head and slid down landing. And it was I'm not really embarrassed about it. It's just kind of I wish my mom had gotten to come out and actually see what I really liked to do rather than just have her get scared even more than she already was, So that's one. I mean, regrets, that was embarrassing. The regret part would maybe be, I don't think I have too many other than I should have gone to Alaska more.
I think everybody, if they can look back and say I maximize my travel as much as possible, that's a solid career. If you look back and you say, I should have gone to Alaska more, it's like you left a couple trips on the table, but your career has been like 25, 30 years. So whatever.
Yeah.
And let's go to question number 3.
Whether it be a brand, a person, a trend, or a style, what do you have the least respect for in the world of snowboarding at this moment?
I like that. Calling it out for what it is. Keep it real and tell us what you really think, Mikey.
Person, style, or brand, or whatever. Least respect for?
Yeah, what do you laugh at when you see, you're like, God, I can't believe he's wearing that, or he's doing that, or I can't believe he's a snowboarder?
Sure. I mean, I have the least respect for brands that hang their hat on rocker snowboards. It's the worst idea ever. I get the combo thing. I'm currently riding a board with camber under the feet and a bit of a rocker because it's a powder board with a short tail. But when you're riding a complete rocker board, and like, I get it, you want to sell shit, but like, to have any conscience of making a decent product and make that for the whole collection in some cases is such a joke. It's the worst. I mean, I get it. For learning, it might be great, but anybody who's like, even like an intermediate beginner should be getting off those boards. And that was a joke. I mean, that's probably the thing I'm most bummed on.
Innovation to sell product, but not really benefit the rider?
Yeah, it's kind of like innovation just to, like you perfectly said. It's just jump on the bandwagon. I could see how you would have a few entry-level boards like that, but to do a full commitment is a joke.
I can see that. Well, Mikey, I want to thank you for your time. Your career has been a long one, man. I mean, you've been snowboarding since like 81-ish. You've been a pro since the mid to late 90s. And while you might not look at yourself as a full-on pro snowboarder now, based off your clothing brand and all that you've achieved and having someone with your history at the helm of one of these brands is, you'll always be a pro, I think, to everyone, although you don't really have to perform anymore. You just have to put out amazing product. And the second you don't, people will be pissed at you.
Well, thank you, man. It's been honestly really fun, and I really appreciate the interview, Mike. It was fun to chat, but also, all the nice comments. So, and it was awesome that you brought Matt Sickles on. That dude is forever homie. So that was really cool to hear his voice.
Well, I will say I just saw a post of his this morning, and he's selling tiny homes now along with his van project in Montana. So you can look up Matt Sickles if you need a tiny home or a VW conversion van, and he will set you up. Mikey, I will see you somewhere. I will buy you a beer when I see you, and I thank you for your time, man.
Thank you so much, man.
Hey, you're welcome. So that was time with Mikey LeBlanc, and what a good dude. I don't know Mikey at all, but he didn't hold back anything in the interview. It's refreshing to have a guest that doesn't want to be guarded or care what people think, and that was Mikey. He may be one of the smallest snowboarders on the planet at about 5'4", but there's no way to put a size on his heart. That dude cares, he tries, and he is all about snowboarding. And you could see that from the beginning. He wanted it, he moved out to Colorado with nothing, and he made it happen. Kids out there, listening to these stories, the one thing that should be learned is that you may have to live in your car for a little bit to make your dreams happen. Everyone who I've talked to on the show who did some car living seemed to make it in the world of snow, and you can do that too. Just get a big car because not everybody's as small as Mikey. Next week on the show, we're going to go in another different direction. I'm heading into the world of base jumping, and my guest specialty is ski base jumping. I'm talking about the super Frenchie, Matthias Giroux, and while most don't live through base jumping accidents, Matthias had a terrible one, and he lives to tell the story. We talk about that, getting into base jumping without the proper experience, and living. That's next week. Until then, please review me on whatever platform you listen to me on and tell your friends about the show. Finally, I want to thank my sponsors, Evo, Rescue Water, and the 10 Barrel Brewery for supporting the show. Have a great week, everyone.